Before we start the presentation, may I ask how many of us here have heard about NEO? Can you please raise your hands? Okay, thank you. And how many of us are NEO holders? Can I have a look? That's quite some. Okay, so we will start with a brief introduction of the history of NEO. So the NEO project, initially it is called AntCheers, and AntCheers started in 2014. And there are two founders, they are called Da Hongfei and Eric Zhang, and both of them, they announced the project of AntCheers for the first time in the Bitcoin conference in Beijing in 2014. And also during that conference, we have raised the seed fund of 90,000 US dollars for 10% of NEO. And then later, after 1 year preparation, we dropped the first line of code on GitHub. So we took, before the launch of the testnet, we did the first round ICO in September 2015, and we raised 2,100 Bitcoins, which equivalent to 700,000 US dollars by that time. And comparing to the ICOs nowadays, it is really a tiny amount. And later, after 1 year development, before we launched the mainnet, in September 2016, we launched the second round ICO, and we raised 600 Bitcoins, and equivalent to 3.8 million US dollars. So it was not because we finished the money we decided to do the second round ICO. Actually, it was within the plan. We only raised the amount of money that is sufficient for the development during that time. And in 2017, middle of the year, in June, we did the rebranding. So we changed the brand from AntCheers to NEO. And because of this rebranding, we got very successful at this rebranding and got very well received, especially in the Western market. Since then, the price of the NEO just went skyrocket. And in the same year, in November, we launched the give back plan. So we decided to set a model within the blockchain industry and to give the invested amount back to the seed fund and the two ICO round investors in terms of fiat currency or NEO token. And early this year, in 2018, in June, we had the first NEO DevCon in San Francisco. It was a very successful event, and almost over 800 developers showed up. So here you can see a picture taken from the conference. And what is NEO? Our vision is to build the smart economy. So how do we define smart economy? We define it in three ways. First of all, we consider it as a digitized economy. We believe that in the future, smart economy, everything can be digitized, including currencies, assets like real estate, houses, cars, etc. And also identity, Internet of Things, devices, etc. Secondly, we consider it is a programmable economy. Because a new platform, we support almost all the mainstream programming languages like C#, JavaScript, Python, Go, C++, etc. So everything on the blockchain is very transparent, and it is operated by the smart contract, which is very objective. And third, we consider it is a trust-free economy. That is because nowadays we believe almost 50% of the cost that we spend for the commercial activities are spent for building the trust. We pay lawyers, we pay auditors, we pay third party, etc. And in the future smart economy, we believe using the blockchain technology, we can significantly reduce the cost of trust, and even there will be no need for a middleman. So how to achieve the goal of a smart economy? We think that the development comes in three pillars. The three pillars are digital assets, digital identity, and smart contract. So NEO used the blockchain technology and digital identity to digitize all the assets, and then use the smart contract, the NEO smart contract, to manage all these assets in the network. And the goal of NEO, our goal, it is a very ambitious goal, and Da Hongfei has mentioned several times in public occasions. We want to build the #1 blockchain by 2020. So what does it mean, #1? It doesn't mean that we want to achieve the highest price. It doesn't mean we want to achieve ranking #1 in CoinMarketCap. It means that we want to make a NEO platform to be the go-to platform for decentralized applications to build on. And how to achieve that? We want to provide advanced performance, diversified ecosystem, and compliance solutions. We believe the future competition comes in 3 dimensions. First of all, it is a technical competition. That is easy to understand because blockchain is an edge-cutting technology. Everything is about tech. And secondly, we think it is an ecosystem competition, which we will go into detail later. And third, it is the governance and compliance dimension competition. So to look into the ecosystem of NEO, we believe that we have a very successful and active community worldwide, which is the key to the success of public chain operation. So globally, we have several representative organizations. These here listed are developer organizations. So City of Zion is one of the most active developer community worldwide. And currently, they have over 200 to 300 developers dedicated to build on top of NEO. And 20% of them are full-time developers working on NEO. And then we have NEL, which is a developer community based in China mainly. And third, we have NEO Research, which is the developer community based in Brazil. So they are dedicated to build the compilers for NEO. And thanks to the contribution of our community, we are very much established 360-degree in all the online and offline social media and community activities. So here you can see that on GitHub we have a very active input from the developer communities mentioned before. And on Discord we have over 1,500 subscribers, and most of them are developers as well. And on Reddit, we have right now 95,000 subscribers, which makes us the 3rd largest community on Reddit after Bitcoin and Ethereum. And on Twitter, we have over 32,000 followers. And also on WeChat, which is mainly for the Chinese communities, we have a long list of WeChat groups managed by the community in China. And the community also contribute a lot to build the tools for NEO platform, like wallets, blockchain explorers, compilers, SDKs, documentation, translations, and developer workshops. These are all initiated by the community. These are the social media. And we do a lot of offline activities as well to have the engagement with our community, like the DevCon we just had. And we do global tours for meetups and workshops, hackathons, etc. So in March, we did the APAC tour. In April, we did the Europe tour. And later, London and Geneva, etc. And also in China domestic. So far, in overall, we have over 100 projects running on top of NEO. And here you can see a sneak peek of the decentralized applications on our platform. And these information are uploaded by the projects themselves. So the real number of the apps are much more than these. So we believe that the consensus mechanism that we choose, which is DBFT, is the best consensus algorithm out there for building the smart economy. So DBFT is the consensus algorithm that is invented by our founder, Eric Zhang. And the features are, it has a lot of advantages. It is extremely fast and has a perfect finality. It takes only one confirmation for a transaction to be registered on the blockchain. And it takes only 15 to 20 seconds for the latency of the block. Sorry. And it is easily scalable. We can scale up to infinite full nodes. And it is eco-friendly. We do not need to do mining on the DBFT consensus algorithm. And it is good operation. It has good operationality. The consensus nodes can be identifiable on the network. So far, we have 7 consensus nodes on NEO blockchain. And before, it was all operated by the NEO Foundation. And some have criticized that in this way, NEO is very centralized, which is kind of true. But we are starting the decentralization since this year in July. So one of the consensus nodes has already been voted to be operated by one of our community organizations called City of Zion. So City of Zion, they are a group of developers which have very great experience and reputation within our community. They have been running on our testnet for over 6 months. After the proven record, that we elected them to become one of the consensus node operator. And besides, there are some other organizations committed to run the consensus nodes, include like KPN, which is the biggest Dutch telegram company. They have been already running our testnet. And then we have Fenbushi Capital, which is also committed to run one of the consensus nodes. And Swisscom, which is the biggest Swiss telecommunication company. Also, they are committed to run consensus nodes. So what we can provide to the projects on our ecosystem, this is very important for the entrepreneurs sitting here. So we can provide support in 3 dimensions. First of all, the technical support. We have a team of experts sitting in Shanghai under the NGD group. So whenever you need technical support when you're deploying your contract on NEO, you can reach out to our team. And secondly, we have the marketing support, like the team that I am leading. We do globally events like workshops, meetups, to invite our eco partners joining these events to have the engagement with our community together. And third is the investment, the cornerstone investment support, which is done through the investment vehicle of NEO Foundation called NGC, NEO Global Capital. So initially, NEO Foundation has issued 100 million NEO tokens. And 50% of these tokens have been reserved by the NEO Foundation. And we will spend these tokens throughout the year in order to enforce the ecosystem development. As you can see, 10% of these reserve tokens are for the team incentives, and then another 10% is for the community incentive, like we incentivize the City of Zion, NEL, and these community groups, they will decide how to spend the tokens to reward the developers who contribute to the NEO platform. And then we have another 15% for the ecosystem investment to support those projects which are instrumental to the NEO ecosystem. Yeah. So, so far, right now, NEO Foundation still reserves 46% of the token, and we are spending it like maximum 15% every year. Our goal is to reach the final decentralization of the network, which means the final decentralization of all these NEO tokens. We had the reorganization since April this year. So before, there was a NEO Council handling everything, and now we have renamed it into NEO Foundation. There are 2 co-chairs within NEO Foundation, who are Eric Da Hongfei and Eric Zhang. And under the leadership of NEO Foundation, we have NEO Global Development. NEO Global Development is in charge for the daily operation and execution of the strategies set by the NEO Foundation. And the business of NGD include marketing, community operations, R&D, and also business development, etc. And there is a separate branch called a separate organization called NGC, NEO Global Capital, which is one of the biggest crypto fund worldwide. They are registered in Singapore and is solely funded by NEO Foundation. So all the investments are done through the NGC. Right now, we are under the development of a new, totally new form, new version of NEO called a NEO 3.0. So NEO 3.1 is the answers. NEO 1.0 is the answers. NEO 2.0 we consider is the smart economy. What we want to do within the new version 3.0 is to build a totally upgraded platform to support the real-world enterprise use cases. Because we believe nowadays all the platforms out there, actually, they have limited capacity to run the real-world enterprise use cases. While in the new version of NEO, we try to optimize the TPS as well as the stability of the network. And we will increase a lot of new APIs and features of smart contract. You can go to our official website and you will find links to all the social medias managed by NGD NEO Foundation. You can take a picture if you want. And then, because time is really limited, so we will have a meetup later tonight in the town. So if you have interest to come over to have deeper exchange with our team, please take a note of the event, the meetup. And you can also follow on the Twitter where we have posted the details for the meetup event. That's all for the presentation. Thank you very much. I am here throughout the conference. You're welcome to reach out to us. And thank you again. Okay.
Thank you very much, Ms. Katrina Zhang. She was Global Marketing Manager, NEO. Moving ahead, ladies and gentlemen, our next session is a panel discussion. If there is one word that has become synonymous with the blockchain industry, it is regulation. Blockchain cannot achieve mass adoption in a seamless way without the help of the government. The government needs regulatory frameworks, and we have got 6 of the best people making up our next panel to explore just that. Please join me in welcoming on stage our moderator for the session, Tanay Mahindru from NITI Aayog. Can we please welcome him with a warm round of applause? Come on, Hyderabad. Thank you. Our panelists, Zakir Merchant, partner, Khaitan and Company Law Firm, Joshua Garcia, principal, Quetzal Consulting, O. Sultan, chief strategist, Sultan Interactive Group, Jason Corbett, founder and managing partner, Silk Legal, Jaren, CEO, Autonomous Capital, and Gurdeep Singh, founder, Blink, co-founder, Boltcoin.
Now, as NITI Aayog, what my perspective is pretty much in line with what we've been hearing, from various governments since morning. When you talk about land records, for example, and when you actually get down to trying to implement a pilot, you find the major encumbrances are legal, right? The fact is that the technology exists to put this on a smart contract. The technology exists to sort of automate this transaction and make it super smooth, remove all intermediaries. But the fact is, there are a number of laws, right from the RBI to the SEBI to IT Act, which simply don't even allow you to digitally sign stamp duty today. You need to go take a hard copy to the office. And these are things that have been built up over many, many years, and it will take time for them to change. But this is the perspective that I come from. But when you speak to Josh and Oz and all these guys, you realize what different countries across the world are facing and how very different a perspective it is, how they're communicating with governments across the world to try to define these frameworks in a more concrete way to sort of allow proliferation of this technology. So first, I think I'd like to invite Zakir to sort of help define try to demystify really, because what you see is RBI stance is slightly grey, but demystify RBI stance on cryptocurrency and blockchain as a whole, and sort of help us understand.
Thanks a lot for that. From my perspective as a lawyer, I look at it in a very simple, plain way. I see two very important limbs which are moving, and they're moving simultaneously. One is a limb which, where there is active involvement of the government. That is the space where the government is adopting DLT technology. Now, I know that that is something which the government is doing at a very fast pace and is going on really well. But my personal sense is that that is 10% of what the entire blockchain ecosystem is all about. So if you ask me what is the impact of the law in that vertical, it's fairly clear. When the government is involved, it's generally a private blockchain. So issues relating to data privacy, issues in relation to normal principles of contract and other principles which are well settled. The second limb is where we would perhaps tread into dangerous waters in this current atmosphere. That is where public blockchain projects are in play. My view is that this is the actual space where most countries in the world are struggling in terms of regulation. And I don't want to talk about cryptocurrency, but I want to explain to this audience that the current RBI notification which has been issued, that does not really ban cryptocurrency per se. It is just an advisory in the form of a notification to the banks which are governed by the RBI and other intermediary bodies who have been licensed by the RBI to transact in terms of fiat for buying currency, virtual currency. This has been challenged before the Supreme Court by way of a clutch of petitions which were filed all across India. And now finally it's been heard in the Supreme Court. Popular perception is that the ban is in place. Yes, it is in place. There is no stay which has been granted. But the Supreme Court is yet to decide on this very important point, and that is something which we will be seeing in September. So, to hold cryptocurrency is not something which is illegal per se at this point in time. It's purely an advisory to the banks which are in play. Now, that is on the cryptocurrency side, but from a legal perspective, I look at this as perhaps an impediment in terms of innovation which is there in the blockchain ecosystem. And the reason why I say this is that if an individual would want to actually develop a decentralized app, and if he doesn't have access to, let's say, Ether, there is innovation which is just out of the door. So India has taken a back step in terms of immediately just putting in place a very simple restriction. Second impact, if you want to participate in an international blockchain project, we have got immense talent in India. That talent would generally participate by issuance of some tokens which has been given to a developer pool. If it's been issued overseas, how would an individual in India bring those tokens into the country and convert it into fiat? So right away we are cutting off an individual's recourse to a very high level of employment, and India has a tremendous set of talent in that sense. The third biggest impact is, I think, in terms of fundraising. Tokens are exactly the meat in the game. If a developer pool is not incentivized, there is no innovation. So I'm not talking about cryptocurrency, but placing this ban in place is actually affecting the innovative side of India, and that's where we're being left behind. And I'm not criticizing this, but I think there is a balance which is required to be made between regulation as well as innovation. And cryptocurrency, yes, it can be regulated. There are several examples where it's low-hanging fruit. I think Japan is one of the best examples. They haven't recognized it as legal tender, but they can say that it's a mode of payment, but it's not a currency. Yeah. No sovereignty will want to replace their currency with something which is another kind of a token. So I think at the cost of innovation, which I think India would probably suffer or take a back seat, the government probably needs to, and private players, they need to start a dialogue to understand that blockchain has to work hand in hand in terms of token issuance.
So we'll get to how the governments maybe across. Right. So another discussion that you're having before the panel really was, is there any parallels with what we've seen in India before? Have we seen something like this or seen a technology that's had to be regulated as such? And I think Gurdeep had a very interesting point as to how the telecom industry actually had very similar problems, and really try to highlight the opportunity that this sort of can highlight in the blockchain space as well.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I'll sort of build on to what Jakir said. You know, India in more ways than one in the past have been at the forefront or have leapfrogged whenever the opportunity has come to us. It basically comes on the back of strong fundamentals that this country has and the needs of this country. Largely rising on 1.2 billion over population, 2.6 trillion economy and growing very rapidly. More than half the population is young. There is a rise in millennials. And the 4G, which has become now ubiquitous, the internet is driving the new socio and economic layer, new ways of doing commerce. And we are seeing more and more generation now getting born on the internet where the adoption is very fast and to the extent it is end-to-end. And we are also seeing the rise of entrepreneurs in India. Now there are a lot more startups coming up. The ecosystem is friendly. We are seeing many companies move into the unicorn club. They're fundamentally rising on the back of technology adoption to the needs of India's information and infrastructure gaps. I mean, if we take the example of telecom industry where I come from, just because that industry regularly or on a periodic basis work together with government to create a positive framework that we now see today over 1 billion people using phone and making a call at the cost of less than 1 cent or maybe half a cent. I think we need to take cognizance of this change in the socio-economic framework that is taking place. And at the same time, there is a rising demand from every stakeholder across the society or in the business areas of high governance, transparency, and government in itself is doing its bit in delayering the processes and putting more use of technology into every sphere and the sector that is possible. To two of the businesses that one I am founder and another I am a co-founder, which is Blink, where I am a founder, and a co-founder is a Bold Coin, which is currently under the process of ICO, where Nucleus Vision is one of the investors, has adopted the blockchain right from the day one. In fact, Bold Coin has adopted the dual, both of Ethereum and the Wave. I strongly believe, and I think I build on to what Jakir said, that it's the right time. We have seen this today, many MOUs being signed across the section of the industry, be it universities, be it the agriculture or a healthcare sector. This is the right time if across the sections of the society or the industry we come together in a positive atmosphere, work with the government to create a framework which can put India at the frontier of adoption of blockchain technology.
Yeah. A lot of countries have similar profiles. They have young populations, they have high GDP, they have a lot of potential there. So, like it or not, India is in a race with other countries who are pushing forward to decide if they want to have a very good and attractive regulatory framework. So as you said, there is a lot of opportunity here, a tremendous amount of opportunity. So some other folks on the panel know a lot about regulatory frameworks across.
I started one of the early Bitcoin exchanges in the US in 2012, and right as I was starting the company, regulation started to come into play in the US. And depending on what state you were operating in, it really had a big effect on whether you were going to be able to raise capital easily. For instance, California was very accepting to crypto, and they were public about it, and you saw crypto companies be started in San Francisco rapidly. New York, on the other hand, started a what I would call a failed regulatory scheme called the bit license, which ultimately scared companies away from New York, and also made it very difficult for the companies who decided to stay to raise capital. I can't tell you how many venture capital conversations I had with investors who would say, well, I mean, what about this bit license thing? Are you going to be able to get one? And ultimately it took years for New York State to even create the bit license, and once they did, they didn't issue it to almost anyone. So we see this on a global scale. There are certain countries who promote accepting policies towards cryptocurrency. Companies are moving there right now en masse. Capital is flowing into those markets, and we see other countries do the opposite. And I think India in particular has a big opportunity ahead of it if it decides to publicly embrace cryptocurrency. What I can say as someone who lives in the United States is that the world is watching, and we are talking about it, about news that's coming out of India. And I really hope, even though I am personally a visitor to your country, I have been fortunate enough to be able to work with a few teams based out of India. And I really hope that India decides to embrace companies that are starting in this industry, because we're watching. We could see billions of dollars flow into the economy here, which will create jobs and more prosperity.
How many of you are involved in, or just by a show of hands, are involved in or considering getting involved in an ICO or some sort of smart contract project? So roughly about a third of you. How many of you have invested in a project or purchased cryptocurrency in the past 2 years? Roughly about a third again. And how many of you are concerned about the regulatory landscape globally and need some clarification as to where things are going? Kind of about a third again. All right. So I'll throw a couple things out, and then I'll toss it over to my colleague here. So in America, we have an organization called DATA, and what the United States government and a bunch of states had decided was that they're not necessarily qualified to be writing the legislation. And so what they've done, if you look at Wyoming, you look at Rhode Island, you look at Nevada, initially, you also look at what's coming out of Delaware, you have different state regulations coming about that are creating new and really interesting opportunities for companies to take advantage of a variety of different incentives that each state has to offer. Wyoming is trying to make itself free crypto state, very much like it did for credit cards maybe about 20, 30 years ago. Now, when you take this to a global perspective, you've got a lot more challenges, right? India had some guidelines against crypto previously that they're starting to revisit, and as our colleagues have talked about here, you've got a great opportunity in a country with 1.2 billion people and $2.6 trillion worth of annual income to do something to actually create new value. And so I'll talk about three things real quick, and then I'll pass the mic. One is, there's a group of us that are working on something called the Crypto Compliance Consortium. And if you're interested in finding out more about that, come and see me or grab me after this. Because one of the things that we're looking to do is to build some standards in between countries to say what's sort of like a fair playing field by which we can do business and we can allow new projects to proliferate. But let's take a look at what happened in Europe recently, not just GDPR, but Gibraltar. So Gibraltar was supposed to be the end-all be-all for creating new crypto projects. you had some changes in EU regulations, and all of a sudden everyone's going to Malta. If you look similarly to the east, we've got Singapore now becoming sort of the gateway for investments through China. And if you look to what's going on in my hemisphere, we've got Bermuda and Cayman becoming sort of the benchmarks for where you're creating foundations. Europe has still got Zug, but you know, there's opportunities for new countries to kind of come into the mix here. And you know, if you look at Mumbai, you look at Goa, right, you look even where we are in Telangana, there's an opportunity to look at what some of your older laws were and rewrite those in a matter and framework that are going to make it easy for the investment into crypto projects or smart contract projects, the leveraging of smart contracts to disintermediate old systems. You know, think about how many middleman brokered systems are here that could be disrupted. And the third is to look at, you know, new and weird technologies that are coming out in terms of, say, stablecoin or backed currencies. I mean, we just had, well, I don't know if I should talk about Stellar real quick, but in the United States, you know, everyone was looking at Hyperledger real weird for a hot minute, and then all of a sudden they went and partnered with Stellar, and the FDIC got into the mix, and all of a sudden you've got a backed stablecoin. So in addition to having like this really broad crypto landscape that we're working in, we now have like a corporate coin that could potentially be used in between industry and, you know, the burgeoning ICO market of entrepreneurship that's out there. So there's a whole bunch of changes afoot on a global perspective, and I'll just end cap there and toss it over.
Sure. So first I'll start with Gibraltar. So Gibraltar is kind of a neat little country in the south end of Spain. Tiny little place. So I went there a couple days ago, back in February for a conference, and it was quite amazing, just a little kind of enclave on the edge of the Mediterranean. But anyway, with the blockchain technology laws in Gibraltar started 3.5 years ago. It's not something that's been cooked up overnight. What they basically did is took a page from the gaming industry, because Gibraltar is one of the premier licensee, or basically regimes that have licenses for online gaming. So back in the late 90s, when people started creating online casinos, Gibraltar stepped up and said, hey, we can basically put together a framework for you guys where you can have licensed online casinos. So they took some of the same lessons they learned from that, applied it to blockchain, and they have the first regime basically that started back in March of this year. Some of the drawbacks about that is every application has to go through the basically the Financial Services Commission and be approved by the board. And what the difficult part is in Gibraltar is they want hearts and minds in Gibraltar. That means senior staff and management, your CEO, your CFO, resides in Gibraltar. And it's not a practical place for a lot of people to live. It's nice, but it's one of these places just kind of hard to get to. So Malta's kind of taken some of the thunder and away from Gibraltar on that. Singapore, just not too far from here, is basically the 4th largest ICO center in the world when you look as far as number of blockchain companies that have been registered there. You know, Singapore has not created any laws. They haven't created any regulation. All they've done is basically the Monetary Authority of Singapore has given a few statements reaffirming that certain laws should be followed. That's all it is. And they've basically been working with the industry on a real kind of a collaborative basis in developing something. So they do have regulation that's coming, but industry and the Singaporean government have been working together to put this together. It's one of these interesting places, so you can actually call up the Monetary Authority of Singapore, go have a meeting with them, and talk to them about your project. And they will give you feedback into, you know, what we need to do here, how it works within the regulatory framework, and such like that. So it's quite good. So the regulator there hasn't changed laws or made laws, but they're accommodating within the existing structures. And the last one, my hometown, basically I live in Bangkok. So Thailand is the first country in Southeast Asia that has actually passed blockchain legislation. It's called the Digital Asset Act. And so the government 3 months ago passed this act, and they've been working together with the different departments to bring regulation forward so you can actually have licensed entities engaging in this space. So the Thai SEC has been basically working with industry. I have one of my guys, the CEO of one of my advisory firms. He's been at the SEC twice a week for the last 3 months, discussing with them, how they can actually make things work. And they're basically coming out with the new regulatory frameworks, and things are moving forward. So if you take a real kind of collaboratory approach and work with government in addressing these problems, it really works. Because the fact is, government sits in the background and they have the bureaucracy around it. And a lot of these guys may have an understanding how it works, but nobody wants to put their head on the line and make a big decision. So engaging with industry, engaging with bureaucracy, and creating a framework that works for everyone to basically protect all the shareholders and stakeholders involved is the way forward.
Malta has a few pieces that are interesting to it. One is it comprehensively regulates exchanges. Another is it has this weird voluntary registration process if you're running in sort of an innovative technology arrangement. And you can have this innovative technology arrangement audited, and you can get some sort of certification by the government of Malta. It's not entirely clear who would take advantage of this voluntary certification process. It does impose a lot of requirements on the innovative technology arrangement. So if you're a smart contract platform and you sign up for one of these certificates, you have to prove that you can make changes to the underlying platform, which is difficult for a decentralized system. So it's not clear how much the government of Malta then actually values decentralization. There's some policy implications to having that sort of setup. Malta, I think, realized it was in a race. Malta took the approach where they rushed to get something out. They had rounds of feedback, but the turnaround time between draft 1 and draft 2 and draft 3 of the regulation was very, very fast. So they, in the allegory of the tortoise and the hare, were the hare. If India is going to take an approach, I would counsel Indian government to be the tortoise, to go slow, steady, do it right, learn from the lessons of Gibraltar, Malta, and others, and really take advantage of everything that you said this country has to offer.
We've seen and heard of examples from all over the world. We've understood maybe the context of India itself, and the idea is now really to build these systems and build these channels and get this communication going so that we can define these frameworks, because we have done so before and we've done so well, and we can do so again. And we can, for this time, for blockchain, and this time to really help grow this ecosystem and let the technology flourish.
One other thing I want you all to think about too is, if you think back about 18 years, right, to the year 2000, India went through a massive amount of cultural and technological change in terms of accepting CMM, in terms of accepting ISO, in terms of shifting to become a economy that really drove and built development around the globe, right? Now, in the past decade, what's happened here is that you've had fintech back office outsourcing of a majority of your big banks and big companies across the globe. I think moving forward from right now, you got to think about 3 things that are going to be necessary here. One is there's a cultural change here, okay? Because what blockchain does is it removes necessary middlemen inside of a process, makes it simpler and easier to do, and makes it more cost effective. By doing that, that's going to change a lot of the ways things operate here. 2 is you have to think about capital. Capital previously was sourced by Indian development projects going across the globe and, building everything from trading systems to SAP implementations to, whatever Oracle was selling that year. And I think where you need to think now is, where is the capital coming from? India is a wealthy country. You've got your own family offices. You've got your own venture capital. And you've got a tremendous amount of companies here that are willing to put money into the next generation technology that's going to become smart contracts. But there needs to be a framework, and there needs to be leadership going into that. And then the last thing I'll really add to that is, and this can kind of go back to the entrepreneurship angle and a few other pieces, is that moving between now into the 2020s, you need to think about the same types of disruptive systems that, you know, really created some of your social entrepreneurship that everyone talked about in India previously. You have the opportunity for, you know, nano projects. You have the opportunity for micro projects. And you have the opportunity to take the 90,000, you know, villages that are in this country that were just recently brought onto broadband and figure out ways that you can leverage those systems to bring in blockchain technology that makes it really disruptive. And it's that disruptive factor that is going to give you the opportunity to do something huge. And at the same token, it's that disruptive factor that's going to be the catalyst that drives government regulation to help support it.
Any questions from the audience?
Are we going to see some changes from a, you know, a banking regulatory perspective, making it much easier? Because right now, I think we see these applications in all the different aspects of blockchain, but very little in finance. Today, I didn't see much in finance, so that was more of a question.
Yeah, I could probably get that one. I think the first question was talking about the number of kind of different applications around finance. I've seen lots of different kind of fintech plays. So my law practice got into fintech about 4 years ago, and blockchain's been last year and a half as kind of a subset of that. There's a lot of applications that I've seen people trying to develop D-apps or new platforms and stuff like that. It does, and it's fantastic stuff, but the fact is it doesn't need a token. So there's a lot of hype in the market, and a lot of people are trying to raise money for projects that really don't make sense for a proper use case on blockchain. A lot of people have been trying to you know, build a use case so they can go out and do an ICO and raise some money. And it's cool, right? I understand that. But at the same time, you know, a lot of these things don't really need to have blockchain behind it. You know, you can't have the security and kind of the opaqueness that some of these financial systems require by having an open source system. People don't want to use it, so that's a bit of an issue. And maybe you get the second question.
I just wanted to add one thing. You can think about lightweight adoption and heavyweight adoption. Lightweight adoption is Santander Bank has partnered with XRP to roll out digital wallets. Now, what they're allowing is people to be able to transfer money to each other. But what they're doing is they're creating the future framework for when XRP and some of these other cryptos are actually accepted by banks. And consider this, you know, Liechtenstein, it's as good as cash. Germany, it's as good as cash for certain types of transactions. And the EU is looking at this completely differently right now. In major parts of the world, you can travel, you could literally just go everywhere and pay in Bitcoin. So that's the lightweight adoption curve with banks. The heavyweight adoption curve is when it starts disrupting. You talked about money lending, okay? Usury is a huge problem in this part of the world. If you can think about one or two, Good Money's sitting out here. I'll give you an example, because he got stuck in customs. I'm just gonna give him a shout out. But take a look at Good Money, okay? Like the ability to actually lend inside of an ecosystem that could be, you know, a nano transaction or a micro transaction. These types of systems need to not just be adopted by banking, but they need to be adopted in more of a cultural fashion, because those types of pushes saying, hey, we want these types of products are really what's going to drive most of these large corporations to say either we have to offer this or someone else is going to come into the market and provide that service.
Now, going forward this year, India is going to launch a Data Protection Act. So how do you see its impact on the blockchain regulation, and will it be an obstacle in blockchain implementation?
I think your question is more on data privacy, the impact of that, right?
Yes.
So the bad news is that already you are supposed to take care of the data privacy issues. EU GDPR is in flow, 25th May 2018, it's come into action. If you are an Indian developer dealing with any kind of a foreign enterprise where you are collecting some form of data, you have to be very, very careful about the law as to how it will impact you, because the penalties are very high. It could be 4% or 2% of your entire annual turnover. So it's very critical that apart from complying with India law on data privacy, you need to comply with EU GDPR, which is the bigger headache. So maybe in the private blockchain perspective, the right to forget is something which could be dealt with. But in a public blockchain, where anonymity is the crux of it, it's going to be a very big challenge and an issue as to how you will implement the right to forget in that sense. But one of the arguments is that if there is anonymous data which is not attributed to an individual, then perhaps the data privacy law may not be applicable in that first case. But that's a test case, that's an argument which needs to be tested. But definitely it's a very big issue for developers, apart from liability issues under your contract as to who will bear the risk in terms of a data breach.
Thank you, sir. Tanay, would you like to kind of wind up the panel or the discussion here?
Thank you guys, thanks everyone for coming down, thanks for your insights, it was a pleasure.
Thank you very much to our moderator and panelists. A huge round of applause for them, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, expressing a gratitude to you all for joining us here for the panel discussion.